Hello, what I want to share with you today are a few ideas that you can use when you're proofreading your writing. It's important not only to write essays for teachers, but to really look at your reading or look at your writing and see if you've turned in exactly what it is you want to turn in. Catch obvious mistakes beforehand because they really make your writing look bad, and if there's one thing you don't want to do, it's look bad. So I've got a few tips to bear in mind for your writing. Here's the first. Read your writing out loud to yourself. I actually want to make this a list of 10 tips, and this one would be the first 8, okay? If you read your writing out loud, you'll catch all sorts of mistakes that otherwise would slip right by. So to look at these 6 bullet points in order, first, read only what is there when you're reading out your writing out loud. Don't read what you think you said or what you meant to say, but only what's there. This step is critical. When you do this, you can, in the second bullet, catch and correct repeated words. Sometimes we type a word once, we forget we've typed it, we type it again, and then we've got something that looks awful on the page. Third, missing words can be added. If you read a sentence that is missing a word, it sounds awkward, it's obvious to you, and then you'll be able to catch that mistake and insert the word you want. The fourth point is important. It might sound awkward. When you write it out or you type it out, it looks fine, but when you read it out loud, it sounds awkward, so you can figure out ways to rephrase those awkward comments. The fifth point is if you hear a short pause in your reading and there's not a comma there, most of the time a comma belongs there, so add a comma. And the last point, if you hear a long pause or if your tone drops at the end of a word, that's a sign that there should be a period there at the end of that sentence. The next tip is to examine your paragraphs, and you want to look at your paragraphs closely for a few reasons. First, make sure the overall length is correct. As we know, depending on whether a paragraph is an introduction, a main body paragraph, or a conclusion, it should have anywhere between 4 and 10 sentences in it. One that is less than 4 is an insufficient paragraph. One that's much more than 10 might be a bit too long. Make sure you've got a clear topic sentence and a claim or a thesis that is right there, so we can see what exactly you're writing about and what your opinion about it is. For each claim or thesis, of course, we know there should be 3 pieces of evidence or 3 examples or 3 reasons to support your opinion, and every time you give a piece of evidence, make sure you include an explanation for each one. That's in your own words, rephrasing what the statement says to make sure that the reader gets what you want to prove and they don't draw their own conclusions from the evidence. Finally, the last 2 points. Make sure that all the points you make in your paragraph are on topic and that all the points support the claim that you're making at the outset. Tip number 3. As you get used to using this process, you'll start to see that certain mistakes show up regularly in your writing. You want to track those errors. And as I said here at the top, these are mistakes, not failures. So don't think that you're doing something terribly wrong. It's simply that we get in habits of writing and we tend to make the same mistakes over and over again. My problem is I tend to write sentences that are too long. So the more you can track these errors, the more it becomes almost an automatic check for you to make sure you're not making these same mistakes over and over again. You'll note the most frequent mistakes that you make, and then you can look for those first in future proofreads. So let's look at a sample paragraph and see what we can find out about this paragraph and what might be wrong with it. Here's our sample paragraph. I'll read it out loud and then make the corrections as I see them. Odysseus is the greatest hero of all time. He shows this when, whoops, shows too many times. I better delete the second one. He shows this when he saves his crew who had eaten the lotus. They didn't want to go home, but he brought them on board to bring them home. This is too long. He shows this when he saves his crew who had eaten the lotus. And the problem is we've got 2 complete clauses here. Each one could be an independent sentence on its own. So I've got a few options. One is that I can make this one into a period and then capitalize the first letter of the next sentence. Or I can turn this into a semicolon and then leave the other one the way that it is. Semicolons can join 2 independent clauses, 2, in other words, complete sentences, but it joins them in a way that can vary the flow of your paragraph and the flow of your writing, and variety is the spice of life, so that's a good thing. I'm going to leave the semicolon there. They didn't want to go home, but he brought them on board to bring them home. This was selfless and just what every Greek really wanted. That sentence sounds good. Next, he figures out how to get out of the impossible situation in Polyphemus's cave. 6 of his men had been killed and eaten. The rest of his crew must have been frantic, enough to make a mistake that would lead all to their eaths. To their eaths. Oh, I see what's wrong here. It should be to their deaths, okay? There's another problem here. This second part of the sentence is not a complete sentence in its own. It says enough, and that implies there's another part that should be attached to it. And, you guessed it, it should be the part right before. The rest of his crew must have been frantic. enough to make a mistake that would lead to all of their deaths. Much better. Now I'll carry on. Odysseus, however, keeps his cool and devises the most clever plan to save their lives. The plan was a totally awesome way to use sheep for freedom. Not so sure about this sentence. Yeah, it may have been awesome, and maybe I'm into using sheep, but really this doesn't pertain to proving the point about Odysseus being a hero, so instead I'm going to select that sentence and just delete it. Finally, he holds others responsible for their mistakes. When he gets home, he kills the suitors just like Tiresias' prophecy. This is already running on too long. I can tell there's a problem here. I'm going to start over again. Finally, he holds others responsible for their mistakes. When he gets others responsible for their mistakes, this should be a period. When he gets home, and I get rid of this W, make it a capital W, comma, he kills the suitors just like Tiresias' prophecy said he should. Oh, much better. In this, he not only shows that he'll hold others responsible, he is being responsible himself. This sentence technically is okay, but I think there's something wrong with this transition over here. He'll hold others responsible, he is being responsible. If I add a word like but in the middle here, then it ties together these two ideas, these two clauses, which are actually independent clauses. They could be separate sentences, but I like having sentences with a variety of lengths. And as I said, my flaw tends to be that I write long sentences. So I'm going to go ahead and stick with my flaw and do this because I think it'll sound good. Now, when you've made a correction, read it again. In this, he not only shows that he'll hold others responsible, but is being responsible himself. These three qualities, selflessness, courage, and responsibility, are the marks of a great hero, which is exactly what Odysseus is. Now, if I look through this and I read the whole paragraph to myself, it's going to sound much better. Let's try. Odysseus is the greatest hero of all time. He shows this when he saves his crew who had eaten the lotus. They didn't want to go home, but he brought them on board to bring them home. This was selfless and just what every Greek really wanted. Next, he figures out how to get out of the impossible situation in Polyphemus's cave. 6 of his men had been killed and eaten. The rest of his crew must have been frantic enough to make a mistake that would lead to all of their deaths. Odysseus, however, keeps his cool and devises the most clever plan to save their lives. Finally, he holds others responsible for their mistakes. When he gets home, he kills the suitors just like Tiresias' prophecy said he should. In this, he not only shows that he'll hold others responsible, but he is being responsible himself. These three qualities, selflessness, courage, and responsibility, are the marks of a great hero, which is exactly what Odysseus is. I've gone through and done the proofreading. I seem to have caught that I seem to make a lot of mistakes with run-on sentences, that is, 2 separate sentences that aren't really separated, and also sentence fragments. We call those incomplete sentences, where there's a piece of a sentence that really needs something else to make it a complete idea. I'm going to watch out for these in the future. I want you to do the same thing as you proofread your own writing before you turn it in to me. Cheers!